gamification per favorire i risultati di apprendimento dei futuri insegnanti.
Thank you very much. First I want to thank INVALSI for inviting us to this beautiful meeting and allowing us to present our work, which is a bit of an oddball compared to what we have seen before in this panel, because as you will see, I'm about to describe an experimentation that we did at the University of Foggia, which was, I tell you from the beginning, not directly linked to learn in the beginning. However, we feel that it can give some contribution, some useful contribution to the discourse about learning to learn, specifically in higher education, but also concerning other levels of instruction. So I'll start from the end, actually, because I want to thank all the people who contributed some ways or another to this study, to this presentation. I am Andrea, as you can see. With me is the Professor Anna Ripace, who could not be there in presence, but was the supervisor of this project, and a list of very skilled and researcher and PhD students who contributed, as I said, significantly to this work. So I will start from thanking them. Concerning the presentation, as we have learned and talked about in the first presentations of this panel, we can define learning to learn as a hyper-competence, which is linked to several factors which are somehow complex to define in full, but it has certainly to do with the ability to improve or update on one's learning, to the ability of facing challenging situations, and to navigate uncertainty in school, work, and life. So how does it relate to higher education? And specifically, what happens to students when they go to the university and they start facing the challenges of higher education? So several students have attempted to define learning to learn in the context of higher education. For example, Wingate says that this requires a fundamental change in students' belief. As from this change from high school to the university, they need to understand and redefine what their role as a learners involves when they go to higher education. And other students, Gogus and Arikan, suggest that students, in order to activate this change, they should share the responsibilities of learning and contribute to the learning activities as a way to improve their learning to learn competence. They must learn to actively and critically engage with knowledge instead of passively receiving it. And Wingate also goes on to define two components of learning to learn in higher education. The first concerns the ability to understand this learning, what learning means in a higher education context, and how to become an independent learner, and defines some subcomponents. On the other side, it defines how understanding what knowledge is and becoming competent in constructing knowledge entails. So this is something that relates to what we already saw in today's presentation, and I will come back to this later. Because I will start to introduce what we did, actually. And it all started from a very practical issue that we had. As you know, during COVID, as many of you remember, we suddenly switched to what has been defined emergency remote teaching. So university teaching was dealt mainly by synchronous webinars, where students and teachers engaged in face-to-face in synchronous learning from distance. And as many of you probably experimented, we had the big problem of keeping students engaged, having them actually participate to lessons and be engaged instead of just passively participating. So we devised a tool, a very simple tool actually, and nothing too innovative, for cognitive activation at the beginning of lessons. So what we did was a classical quiz, a multiple choice quiz for students, which we did at the beginning of each lesson, focusing on the content of the previous lessons. And we did so in a gamified manner. So we used a very popular software, which is Kahoot, which probably every person in the room knows, which is a tool that allows to participate in those quizzes together and has some gamification elements. So for example, it defines, it gives points for answers, whether they are correct and whether your response was fast enough. And at the end, it gives a winner, a score, and etc. So it has some gamification elements. We used it mainly, we conceptualized it as a tool for assessment for and as learning. Because in this way, from the teacher side, we could have a snapshot of whether the students had developed an understanding of the knowledge of previous lesson. And on the other side, we conceived it as a tool for assessment as learning, because students, by testing their knowledge, could understand if they understood correctly or whether they had some misconceptions or holes in the preparation. This tool, we believe, can be related to the framework for learning to learn in higher education, because it can help students assess their present abilities, in particular their knowledge and understanding of learning content. It can also help monitoring their progress in reaching targets. Since we did it regularly through the course, the student can monitor their progress. And also as a way for a formative evaluation of progress and achievements. So in some way, it could be a tool to help students develop this learning to learning. Of course, this is all very theoretical, because we didn't have a real study, a real empirical testing framework. So some lesson learned from this previous activity was that indeed this tool was very helpful to foster active participation and engagement. The tool was very appreciated by students from the feedback that we had at the end of each lesson and at the end of the course. And the students seem to recognize the value both as a tool for assessment as learning and as a tool for assessment for learning. However, this tool had one significant drawback compared to what we just defined as learning to learn. Within this tool, the student was just a simple user in the process. We prepared the question, we submitted it to them, they came to the lesson, and they did their part. So for the next step, for the next program in 2002-23, in which those classes return to presence, we defined a new framework for an exploratory study. And within this context, we wanted to change the role of a part of the students. In particular, we wanted some students not just to be users, to also participate to the activity and do the quizzes, but we wanted a part of the students to generate the multiple choice question that their peers would then participate to. The rationale was based mainly on the literature, because we know that this process of creating questions for favors reflection and consolidation of learning content, it allows students to experience new study and reflection methods, the ability to put into question the knowledge and the learning material. And also, it was a way to help students responsible for their learning and for the success of the learning activity. So it was a way also to responsibilize students. So what we did basically was to split students in user and makers. We did it in two different courses in the University of Foggia. And the first one was a course of Didattica Generale, sorry for the bad translation, part of the degree in Education and Information Sciences, and it was a blended course, so it was 50% in presence and 50% asynchronous. And it was for students already at the third year of the degree course. The second course was in methodology of research in education, which was part of the primary education degree, and it was fully in presence and destined to first year students. So we had 42 makers and 42 users for the first one, and 74 makers and 73 users for the second part. Now I'm asking you to bear with me for a while I explain you the framework. It's not as complicated as it sounds. On the left side, you have the students who decided or could not participate to the study. So basically, they did not participate to any of the activity, they just went to the final examination. Users, what they had to do was to participate to a sufficient number of multiple choice quizzes during the course. We had established some sort of extrinsic motivation, because if students participate to at least 70% of the cognitive activation activity, they would receive 2 bonus points at the final examination. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the essence. For makers, which were volunteer, we explained them the experimentation at the beginning of the course, and they volunteered for participating. They received short training on how to build multiple choice questions, and then each week a part of those makers had to prepare 6 multiple choice questions concerning the previous activity. They received a formative feedback in the form of a rubric from the trainers, and then a sample of those questions would be used for the cognitive activation activity in the lesson. They could, but it was facultative, also participate to the cognitive activation activity itself, and if they reached a threshold for sending enough multiple choice questions, it was 66%, they also get 2 bonus points at the final examination. Is it all clear, or was it okay? So I will skip this part. If you're curious, we can talk about it later. Basically, we did somehow complex way to make sure that the contributions were anonymous. So we didn't know who was what until the end of the activity. And okay, very short. To evaluate the impact of the activity, we use the classical Kirkpatrick model. And in this presentation, I will only focus on 2 of the levels. We define a post-hoc survey to examine the reaction of the students based on satisfaction, engagement, and perceived relevance. We looked at the actual learning that happened, and we had several indicators. For makers, we examined the quality of multiple choice questions that they sent during the course. For the users, we analyzed the results of the cognitive activation activity, so the quality of the answers to the quizzes. And also, this is unfortunately still in progress, we also have some self-assessment tool within at this level, because we ask students to predict how many questions they will get right before the quiz. So we want to analyze how this went. And we look also at the final examination results. And for the level that I will present you today, we looked at the behavior. So how students acted and whether this was an indicator of the activity. So we look at 2 different indicators. How much users and makers participated to the classroom activity, and their attendance to the first round of the final examination. So I will skip the survey. This is just to say that the 2 courses were so different from one another that we didn't pool the sample, but we examined it as two different samples. So the questionnaire I will skip. If you're curious, we can discuss it during the question time. Just very quickly, we observed that during time, makers became more and more efficient in writing quality multiple choice quizzes. But at the final examination, we didn't observe any significant difference in the performance of students, of users versus makers. Both performed significantly better than people who did not participate, but of course, this is not very indicative. What we think is very interesting, concerned, especially for learning to learn, is what we observe at the behavior level. The first surprising observation that we made is that the makers, so the people who wrote the multiple choice question, which were not obliged to participate in presence in order to achieve the bonus at the final examination, were actually the ones who participated most. They participated more than the other students who depended on the participation to get the bonus point. So this was one indicator that we found interesting, because it suggested that the students were actually engaged in the activity. Probably since they also contributed to the quality of the activity, they were also more engaged, more prone to participate. Maybe they liked seeing their question being selected for the activity, and so on. And what is really striking, and the main result that we wanted to discuss with you today, was what we saw when we examined the participation to the final examination. So very shortly, actually we observed that 100% of the makers came to the first round of the final examination, so to the earliest possible date for final examination. Users, of course, also participated more than the people who did not take part in the classroom activities. But what is striking is that basically 100% in 2 different courses that were structured very differently from one another, everybody went to the first round of final examination. And this is, we think, an indictment of the fact that probably the students, through their activity, through their reflection on the course material, through the participation, they became less anxious about the final examination and more confident in their preparation. So we think, and that's the small contribution that we wanted to give on the discussion of learning to learn, this would be a useful indication of how by when you engage actively students in the materials of the courses, and when you define for them protocols for helpful participation, this can foster their engagement, their contribution, and this reflects on their ability to stay engaged and to keep on track in their academic purpose. Of course, we can discuss, but keeping on track with the activity is a very important indicator for academic success, reduces the risk of dropout, etc., etc. So, just to conclude, we think that with this small protocol, makers could have developed other aspects of learning to learn, which were about the ability to approach information, learning materials and text in a more critical manner, since they had to problematize, since they had to find the right answer, but also to create the false answer, etc. This was a way to reflect and critically assess the learning materials. And also probably help them to synthesize the sources, the ability to define a short and effective question. This was a way to reflect, deepen their reflection on learning materials. So we propose that this small experience could actually give us some indications about how to develop successful learning to learn in higher education. Of course, there were limitations to the study. It had a semi-experimental setup, so we had no real control group. We unfortunately don't have a long-term follow-up of the students. We can try to contact them in a few months or years to see whether they use this approach in their study method, but we don't have this for at the moment. But we think, yeah, that this is the first step in design activities that, as you can see, this is nothing exceptionally difficult. Responders have been used since the 60s as a tool for formative assessment. But we think that within the right framework, they can help also develop self-learning and potentially metacognitive student abilities. Thank you very much for listening.